Hi folks, I'm in Virginia and I'm snowed in and I've got more snow coming down now, and so I get a little stir crazy. I'm building chain right now. It gives me something to occupy my hands. And I wanted to show you how I make chain. This is just a little short piece. It's sterling silver. I work primarily with sterling silver. I just finished a pair of earrings today. I don't know how well you can see that. I'll post a photo. And maybe as the I'll figure it out. I don't remember the name of it. The thumbnail. Yeah, that's the thumbnail. Anyway, I'm making sterling silver chain, and this is the wire is 20 gauge. And it's 925. 925 is the definition of sterling silver. 92.5% fine silver, and the rest should be copper. Fine silver is like this right here. This you've seen these before. It's 1 ounce of 999 silver. You take this, and there's, you figure out the math on it. I use a spreadsheet, but you can mix this with copper and have sterling silver, or you can buy sterling silver in sheets and buy the wire. I'm starting to make my own because it's so much cheaper to buy. This is $30 right here. And that's spot price for 1 ounce of silver. I'll end up paying $45 for it, just because if I don't make it myself, if I don't alloy it myself, I pay $45 for it at a minimum. But there's some things that really are worth paying a little extra, and having the metal processed for you a bit. So if you buy the wire, of course, you don't have to make the alloy yourself, and if you buy strips of sterling silver, then you don't have to melt this down and run it through a rolling mill and all that kind of stuff. But that's kind of fun. I enjoy doing that. I've made one piece of wire so far, and it came out pretty good. I made a little ring with it or something. I forget what I did with it. But sterling silver, you use sterling silver instead of regular, full silver. 999% pure silver. You never buy pure silver. Pure silver, I suppose theoretically it might exist somewhere, but there's always a little tiny bit of contamination. And so they say 999% pure. Sterling silver is 925% pure. So it's not as pure as silver, and that's not a bad thing. If you know something is sterling silver, then you know how much it weighs, then you know how much real silver, or how much fine silver is in that. Assuming you buy from a good source, or you make it yourself like I do. There's some things that I'm making chain right now, and I buy jump rings. These are 5mm inside diameter, 20 gauge sterling silver jump rings. And the way you make chain is you take a piece of wire, wrap it around the spindle, slice it so you end up with a bunch of rings, and then you hook those rings together and you weld them together. I skip the first couple of steps, and I buy the wire already cut and wrapped into a circle. for a chain this size. This is 20 gauge. If I make a bigger chain, like this chain right here, this is much heavier wire. I will actually buy the wire, and I haven't made. I'll be making my own soon. But I buy the wire and then I wrap it around a spindle, and I've got a little saw that lets me saw the links out. But once you've got the links, then you have to attach them together and weld them. Well, somebody's sending me a message. You can weld them or you can solder them. And I weld, I do a lot of all this jewelry I'm wearing, these bracelets and all the little pendants and fancy stuff, all this is welded. The chain is soldered. Most jewelry is soldered, but welding it, if solder is stronger than my welds. I'm not saying it's stronger than everybody's welds, but it's stronger than my welds. But welding is fast. With a 20 gauge jump ring like this, what I do is I've got this ring, and because I bought it, it's the ends of the wire are cut very precisely, and they come together very well. So when I put it on my chain here, and then I'll look through the microscope and bring the ends together, and then I'll weld it. Sometimes it'll take in one shot, sometimes it'll take in two or maybe even three, and that kind of depends on, to some extent, how clean my needle is. And my needle's not too bad. And then I take these little pliers. Each side is completely round and they're long and tapered. I put those into the ring that I just welded, and on one side, where this one of the upright things, that's where I put my weld. And then I kind of put it down there and I stretch it out and make it oval. Now I put quite a bit of force on there. If it doesn't break, it's a good weld. I weld these little chains, these 20 gauge and smaller. I make one chain that's a little bit smaller. I make these by buying the jump rings, because when I weld them together, I can get a much better weld with that nice clean cut that I get when I buy the jump rings. If I cut it myself, these are small enough and my hands shake enough, I can't get a nice good a cut on it. And maybe you want to say that it's no longer considered handmade because I take that step, but if anybody wants to fuss at me too much, I'll claim ADA, and you try it whenever you're 68 years old. And your hands and your wrists hurt, you can't cut it straight because you're getting too flipping old for it, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, with larger chains like this, it's much easier to cut, and you don't need as many links. And so you can file it just a little bit. It's bigger wires, so when you file it, you can kind of get a nice end on it. And then a bigger chain like this, I usually solder anyway, so I'm adding metal when I solder the chain. And so it doesn't have to be as precise. But these little chains right here, to get a good weld on them, you really do, for my abilities anyway, it's better to just buy the jump rings, because you're still making the chain, and you're doing whatever you're going to do with the chain, which you can use the chain once you made it. This is the chain I make to do these little permanent jewelry chains. My permanent jewelry chains are 5 times as bigger than anything you'll see by going to to a hair salon or something like that and having a permanent buying a permanent jewelry chain there. Mine I consider them handmade for the reasons I've mentioned so far. Of course, some people would say you need to make the wire to make the ring to truly call it handmade. The definitions get really fussy on what you can say is handmade and what you can't. Handcrafted, handmade. I know I can say handcrafted. And this chain is handmade. All of this stuff right here, this is, I call it handmade too. Basically, the difference between handmade and anything else is if you buy a bunch of charms and you buy a chain and you hang those charms on the chain and make a bracelet out of it, you bought all the components, and all you did was the final assembly. That right there I don't think quite qualifies as handmade, but some people would call it that because you don't use a machine to do the assembly, I guess. I prefer taking it back just a little ways. These earrings, for example, I did not make the lever back, the ear wire. These things right here, they're comfortable and they're secure, and it's stupid to make them. Otherwise, I'd do them. Well, with this one, it's a little palm tree, and it's got 5 fronds on it, and 6 little onyx cabochons. I mounted each one into a little bit of silver, and then I mounted the mounted cabochon down to the base. So I've got a little palm tree sitting in a pile of rocks. That I made 1 pair of earrings, and I have no intention of making another one like that. It was too much of a pain. But I had a client that's what she wanted, so that's what I made her for. But anyway, on the chain, I usually, it's kind of like knitting, I suppose. Well, I don't knit, so I can't say that for sure. But you just pick up a little link and zap it with the welder, and this is a TIG welder. For those of you who are welders, you would say this is probably not a TIG welder, maybe, but it's got a tungsten probe here, and I use argon, an inert gas. And if you're gonna weld on silver, you need to use the just argon. Don't get the mix. Don't get the mix of argon and carbon dioxide. It just doesn't do as well. And I'm for these little chains right now. I've got it set at 19 watt seconds. But one of the other things about welding, let me test this length. Oh, I already did. Yeah, it's stretched out and it's oval, so it's a good length. If you solder these things, by welding it, by the time I'm done stretching it out and looking at it, I've knocked off all of the soot for the most part. The chain's clean. If I solder it, if you solder, you have to use flux, and flux turns into something that's essentially melted glass, and you've got to get that stuff off, and then you've got fire scale, and soldering is messy, and you have to do an acid bath after you finish soldering. I use just plain vinegar, hot vinegar in a crock pot, But most people use a much stronger chemicals. I don't like doing that. And that, once you get that, it's going to leave kind of a white glaze on it, on kind of a white powder on the silver, or a little bit of residue of some sort. Then you got to clean that off. If you're making chain with a welder, as soon as this is finished. As soon as I weld it, it's finished. So I find it a very convenient way to make chain is to use a welder. If you got any questions, let me know. I'm going to go back to my welding.